You're watching an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company.
What's up, Mob Associates? Jimmy Naples here, Johnny Ciccatelli, and we got a special guest today, Gary Bonnell, and we're going to be talking the Marsh murders. So, Johnny, you guys covered part one. So give us a quick, for our viewers that maybe didn't see part one, give them a quick review of, what you guys covered in part one.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We've been doing an investigation into these Marsh killings, which is a Benjamin Marsh and his family. Benjamin Marsh was a security guard at General Motors Lordstown, who was horrifically killed in his home in 1974 in Canfield, Ohio. Believed that he uncovered a drug ring that was run out of GM Lordstown and, brought it to his superiors. Eventually was going to testify before a grand jury. Before any of that could happen, he was killed. His family came home, unfortunately, during the killing, and they were murdered as well. His wife and his 4-year-old daughter. He had a newborn son, who was not harmed, but they found, in the crime scene later on. The case went unsolved for decades until finally in 2013, I believe, a gentleman named James Ferrara was eventually charged and convicted. James had already been serving a life sentence for a different crime. And on paper, it looked like, okay, the case was done. But the more research we do into this, we found that it doesn't really appear to be the case. Gary wrote a great book here called Truth, Not Deception. Where is the GM Marsh family murder file? The demise of GM. You can get this at truthnotdeception.com, amazon.com. You'll be able to find it there. So we highly recommend you check that book out. We had Gary on for a previous episode. He told us all about his time working at General Motors. He knew Benjamin Marsh. He came across this, this drug ring. We covered all that in a previous episode. So if you're listening to us right now on Apple or Spotify or iHeartRadio or anything, definitely check out one of the previous episodes on the Marsh murders. And you can always watch on YouTube as well at our YouTube page, youtube.com/Amazing Podcast Company. We did a whole 3-part investigation into that where, spoiler alert, we found new evidence that shows someone else did this crime, killed the Marsh murders. And we believe it was a hitman-for-hire named Bobby Parks. Again, we go into a 3-part, investigation into that, starting with our interview with Gary. Then we talked, Jim and I talked all about who Bobby Parks was, and we eventually went to the prison down at Marion Correctional and talked to Jim Ferrara, giving him that new evidence. So, Gary told us all about his early days there at GM. Eventually, he was let go. Is that
correct? That is correct.
And what year? Do you remember what year you were let go?
1972.
1972. So after Marsh had found these drugs, but before he was killed. So kind of in that time, Gary was, kicked out there at GM, forced out. And we'll pick it right back up now. After these these murders, you made your way back to GM. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How did that come about?
In 1975, I just got remarried, and my wife and I were discussing what went on at GM, and I said, I think we ought to send the chairman of the board a letter, which ended up being an 8-page letter, which is contained in the book. And that was in November of 1975. Shortly thereafter, I got a response from GM. It was not quite a nice response. They did respond, Alfred S. Warren Jr., who was the uh, head of personnel of Chevrolet Motor Division. Now, you have to understand, during the 72 year, there was a great transition that took place at GM internally. They went from Chevrolet Motor Division because they had so many problems with quality in the vehicles. They went to General Motors Assembly Division. Then came the war within the war. The Chevrolet people resented that. The new people that were GMAD had the mark on their back, and the war was on. So, anyway, wrote the 8-page letter after my discharge. I was called in and discharged. Said I pulled a knife on a guy, which was later proven totally erroneous. So I sent the 8-page letter. Alfred S. Warren contacted me and wanted to meet me. He was head of the Chevrolet personnel. Mm-hmm. And he interviewed me, and he said, I don't believe you're credible. And I not that I didn't expect it, but I guess I did. And I said, well, you'll find me very credible when I hit 60 minutes. And I said, I'm not here for fun and games. I'm here for the truth. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I get a phone call from Alfred S. Warren Jr., and he said, I want you to meet John Franey, and who was head of personnel of all of General Motors, mm-hmm. and also meet the regional plant manager, Strouder, who was over A.B. Anderson, the plant manager. Okay. So I did not know him, never met him, never saw him. So Mr. Shouters mysteriously couldn't make the appointment at the Avalon Motor Inn to meet them. And so the GM Assistant Director of Plant Security, Warren Jeffries, took his place. So the two were at the Avalon Motor Inn, mm-hmm. and they said, do you mind going to a room and sitting down and talking? We haven't eaten yet. And I said, no. Can we buy you dinner? No. I said, I just had a spaghetti dinner. I didn't trust the situation. The reason I didn't trust the situation, the day before, I get a phone call from a committee man, a union person, saying that they're in the plant, they're questioning everyone, and told me, don't trust them. And I said, okay, I appreciate the heads up. So I brought with me a bottle of water, and I brought, I'd already had dinner. And I said, no. I said, they said, do you mind sitting in one of the rooms? We'll pull up a table and we'll discuss what went on. The primary point of the conversation, believe it or not, was not the poor quality that was going on in the plant. It was the Marshes. Mm-hmm. And they kept going full circle back to the Marsh murders and what I knew about it. And I said, I've told you everything I know about it. I said, I told you about William Milano, who spat in my face and spat in the face of Ben Marsh, threatened to kill us, kill our families. I said, I don't know what more to tell you. So as the Q&A continued for about 2 hours. They ordered a filet. Never forget the menu. And they started eating dinner and talking with me as they ate. And they said, "Do you mind if we have a drink?" I said, "I don't care. I don't have any problem. Would you like something?" I said, "I don't drink." So anyway, they ordered a fifth of Southern Comfort. The number I found out on the receipt was $44.11. By the end of the conversation with them, um, it was a situation that they were totally drunk and completely drunk. So after I said, "I think it's time to leave." So I broke the meeting up, but it kept coming full circle about the Marsh case. And so I went home and I told my wife I was pretty down. I said, "I don't think anything's going to happen." I said, "Both of them were drunk." And I said, "You know what I think I'm going to do is call the Avalon Inn and say that Mr. Jeffries is staying at my house at 418 Grant Street and ask them if they'll send me a copy of the booze bill for $44.11, the Southern Comfort." So I did that. They sent it. And 3 to 5 days later, my wife said, "You have a phone call." I said, "Okay." Here it was Richard Terrell, who was vice chairman under Murphy, second man in command at General Motors, on the phone. And he says to me, he says, "Mr. Bonnell," he says, "I'm sorry, but we don't feel you're credible. Mr. Franey and Mr. Jeffries interviewed you." And I let him speak. And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Why did you send a damn drunk, two drunks down to turn around and find out about a murder?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, $44.11 worth of booze. They were hog drunk. That's why I left." He says, "Can you prove that?" I said, "Have it right in front of me, copy of it." He said, "Can you fax it to me?" I said, "I don't have a fax machine, but I will go fax it to you." And I did. He called me back that evening. He's burning the midnight oil a little bit, and he called me back that evening. He said, "Don't do anything." He said, "Time out." And so then a couple days later, I get a call from Alfred S. Warren Jr. And he said, "Ha, ha, ha." He says, "You're coming back to General Motors." I said, "Really?" "Yeah." And I said, "How did that happen?" He says, "Well," he said, "the chairman of the board, Mr. Um,
That's okay. The chairman of the board.
yeah, the chairman of the board said that he thought you had potential and wanted to bring you back." And they said, "Where would you like to go?" And I said, "I want to go back to the truck plant where all this occurred." They said, "No way." They said, "You'll never survive," quote unquote. Said, "You'll never survive going back there." He says, "We're going to locate you a job." And then in the following day or two, I got a phone call from Mr. Hilder. And by the way, the chairman of the board was Thomas Murphy. And I got a call from Mr. Hilder, who was chief legal counsel of all of General Motors. Now, you have to put in context that GM was the largest corporation in the world at that time.
Yeah.
And they had 44% of plus of the market share of all vehicles. So it was most certainly a pretty high-powered phone call. And Mr. Hilder called and he said, "We have decided to bring you back." And he says, "We're going to set up a a meeting with you and Mr. Walt Jacobs, who was zone manager, or who is the um, zone assistant manager of the Pittsburgh zone office." And I says, "Why Pittsburgh?" And he says, "You can't stay here for your safety. You cannot stay here." And I said, "Okay." So anyway, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Jacobs. Very, very fine gentleman. And he did an interview, which is in my book. And uh, he was very, very positive. It was a very positive interview. They gave me a copy of it, which is in the book. And he said, "I'll be getting back with you." He says, "You're not going to be going," he did tell me at the end, "you're not going to be going to the Pittsburgh zone office. You're going to be heading to, to the Harrisburg zone office." I says, "Well, who's going to cover all this expense?" He says, "Well, they've arranged, they're going to pay you all your back wages for 3 years, almost four," which they did. "They will pay for all expenses to the Harrisburg zone." And I said, "Well, what about my wife? She has her master's degree plus, and she's in education." And he said, "Well, um, he says, we'll take care of that. We'll get her a job." Lo and behold, they got her a job. We went there. They covered all the expenses of moving, everything.
Were you happy about all this?
Yeah, kind of, because I did not think, I guess I was naive, I did not think this extended what happened at Lordstown was a represented General Motors. I didn't.
You thought it was more of a Mahoning Valley
Mahoning
issue.
Valley crime group. Well, I found out differently. I went to the zone office, started work at the zone office, and they put me in a position which was called the GM training van, where I would go from dealer to dealer, the 100+ dealers that was in that zone, and we had a 35 millimeter projector in there, but the guy before me, he went in a suit, went fishing. I went in a leather jacket, which I was chastised for by the zone manager. He said, "Why are you wearing that for?" I said, the mechanics aren't going to relate to me." So one of the first moves I made, I went into a dealership and I said, "Go out and get a truck with a 400 transmission in it." He said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "We're going to tear it apart." Because I had a background, I knew the mechanic would win. So we did. We did that on several of the dealerships, and we were rated by the dealerships across really the United States. I went from 0 to the top in my ratings, and that was why. So shortly thereafter, they decided to promote me to a zone service manager. And I says, "Okay, I knew what that was because I was involved with the zone at that time. And they said, we want you to move to Reading, PA. I said, okay. I said, how is that going to affect my wife? He said, she can continue to travel. We'll cover the expenses. They did. So I took the job as the zone service manager out of in the Reading location.
Yeah.
And that entailed none other than Mafia Country, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pittston, and Shenandoah.
Mm-hmm. And for anybody who doesn't know, a lot of times people always just think Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but that Scranton area, that Pittston, had its own little family.
Yeah, that's the Russell Bufalino territory.
Anybody who's seen the movie The Irishman, that was Joe Pesci, right, in that movie.
Yeah.
But, that's definitely very mob connected area.
That was, from what my understanding is, that's where the mob really started, was in the Pittston area, not Boston.
Yeah, I mean, New York and was the epicenter, right? And everything kind of spread from there. But yeah, it was definitely from the beginning. Pittston was a major spot.
So I walked into a dealership, one of my assigned dealers in Pittston, PA. It was Gene Lisby Chevrolet Cadillac and Mercedes-Benz. All of them packed 45s. That didn't make me feel real warm and fuzzy. And Mr. Lisby proceeded to go up and put his finger right in my nose. He said, I know all about you. I know all about Lordstown. I know why you're here. And chills ran up and down my back. So then Mr. Lisby was audited. We saw that his per car warranty at that time should have been below $90, but was well above $100. And he got red flagged right away. So two of us went in and did an audit on him and caught him in fraud, $300,000 worth. So we were one of his favorites at that point. And Mr. Lisby proceeded with his annex. When I came up to Wilkes-Barre, I used to stay at the Wilkes-Barre Inn, which is a very exclusive inn, waterfall under the glass floor. And I got a knock on the door. And I opened the door in the evening and it said, Jean sent me. Beautiful woman, fur coat. She opened it up, had nothing on. I said,
a lady of the night, maybe?
Yeah, I kind of think so. And I said, tell Mr. Lisby, said, Jean sent me. And said, Mr. Lisby, I said, tell Mr. Lisby I'm happily married and I'm going to stay that way. I said, thank you. Shut the door. Well, he knew he couldn't buy me at that point. Couldn't put me in a predicament. And then I find out during this whole episode with Lisby, I find out that the half owner in it was none other than Judge Delsandra. I don't know if that rings a bell to you or not.
It does not.
Nancy Pelosi Delsandra. A relative.
Okay.
He owned 50% of the dealership. Just to kind of go fast forward, did a good job there, but all of a sudden, an episode happened with, and by the way, Mr. Lisby and Mr. Delsandro spent prison time for committing fraud on their income tax. And that's documented in my book. So anyway, I get a call from my superior, William McLaughlin, and he said, Gary, he says, Lispy's putting a addition on his dealership. And this was on a Saturday. He called, and I said, tomorrow's Sunday. He said, yeah. He said, would you mind going up and checking it out and approving it? I said, fine, I'll do it. So I went up. There was no places because of the construction going on where I could view the car, which I was very concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, after that, I want you to stop at Fisher Chevrolet back in Reading on your way home. He says, we have to authorize an engine for the dealership. And I said, okay.
So one more time, real quick. So who gave you the order here?
William McLaughlin, he was my superior.
Okay.
In his own office.
So he's telling you to go to this specific spot and then stop in Reading afterwards.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I was on my, long story short, I was on my way back home from Fisher Chevrolet. I parked the car where I could see it, left the engine running, went in. We had a stamp system, an authorization, and authorized the engine. Got in the car and started back home. And all of a sudden, I pushed on the brakes. There was a lot of traffic that day. The car didn't stop. The master cylinder was later found. A strange series of events had happened. When I hit the brakes, I accidented a car with 8 people in it, station wagon. My head went through the windshield. And when the police arrived, they said, why weren't you wearing your seatbelt? And I says, I have it on. I said, I haven't moved. The seatbelt was disabled. And so I questioned about the brake failure, because we did have brake failure with that particular vehicle and with GM products. There was 2 master cylinders that were made. One was an AC Delco, and the other one was a Bendix. So they, being GM, did not know, and I had access to contact the factory and find out what master cylinder was in there. They couldn't tell me which one. So the car got towed. My head was split open. I had a severe concussion to the point of regurgitating 36 times in one day. The vehicle was towed to a secure lot, taken out of that secure lot, put up at Fisher Chevrolet, and a week or so later, when I felt a little better, I went up to inspect it. Lo and behold, the seatbelt was still not working. Master cylinder was there. So I went back a couple days later. The master cylinder was missing. Then starts the end. They decided to total the car, which was not totaled. It was my 1977 Monte Carlo company car with 3,000 approximate miles on it. They decided to give it to a vocational school, and found out later, long story short, they ordered it to be destroyed. So that's exactly what happened. They destroyed the car. And at that point, I contacted a friend, which I made within GM, D.L. Peterson. He was a field engineer for not only our zone, several zones. Very, very intelligent man. Developed a personal relationship with he and his wife. And I said, what do you think? He said, Gary, he said, I checked into it and I was given orders to back off by corporate. They told me, don't go near there. So I said, can I ask you a question, D.O.? And he said, yeah. He said, I said, how could they sabotage that master cylinder? He said, they could drop a needle in the ports in the master cylinder, and it would eventually, slowly lock up, and you would have no brakes. So that was probably, he said, that's probably the reason it disappeared.
Yeah.
They didn't want to identify any foreign matter in there.
So long, the point of that long story was that they were trying to, in your opinion, get rid of you.
Yes.
And make it look like an accident.
Right.
Now, do you think it was a concerted effort? Do you think GM was maybe being bullied by the mob because the mob controlled the unions at that time?
I really have no idea, but really the union up there was not involved. All was involved was the dealerships and the mob.
Right. But my thought is, so, most of their union infiltration, and of course you were up in an area where, it was heavy mob area, Scranton area. Those guys controlled a lot of those, union workers. Some of those guys at the dealership could have been union, right? So, I mean, what's to say word didn't come through those guys? Hey, the GM, hey, lay off this investigation, or you're going to have union problems.
Well, that could have been. That's a possibility. Do I think that? No. I think I knew too much because the Marsh situation kept coming up.
And do you think the GM just wanted to sweep the Marsh case under the rug? It was a bad publicity, bad, black eye for GM if that became a national story. They didn't want that to become a national story at all, right?
That's correct.
Because at the time when Benjamin Marsh was killed, the narrative out there is that it was some kind of home invasion, home robbery, and that's what the police were saying at the time. Was they believe it was a burglary gone wrong, even though nothing was stolen, or there was no real evidence to prove that.
And that would be, to me, that would be the way GM would want it to come out, because they,
well, they'd want it to be an accident, obviously.
Right.
For yourself, you're saying, yes.
Yeah.
We're going back to Marsh and saying that to have such a horrific crime that happened to the Marsh family, tied to General Motors, at that point it was not a national story. This was a local story. The Marsh case was a local story that was again framed as a home invasion. Just kind of a one-off, nothing, not connected to anything else. In fact, none of these details come out until many, many years later when you publish your book. Even up until that point, it was still nothing was really known about this Marsh investigation, this Marsh case. So now that they bring you back into the fold in GM, and you're still kind of not really going with the flow of some of these other corrupt individuals. You're exposing people, you're auditing people, you're showing fraud. You're still a thorn in the side of the criminal elements that are involved with General Motors.
Well, absolutely.
So you become a target then, and in your opinion, they did these things. This I hate the word conspiracy because it gets so there's such a negative connotation these days with conspiracy theory. But in your opinion, you believe there was a concerted conspiracy to remove you from the situation.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what it was? From the way it looks, right? So first off, we know that Youngstown has a connection with Pittsburgh, and we know that Youngstown was also connected with the guys from Scranton, right? So it's logical to think that there could have been conversations about this Marsh killing with these guys in Pittsburgh and, of course, up in Scranton, right?
I'll never forget Mr. Lisby pointing the finger right at my nose and said, I knew all about you from Lordstown.
Right. And so that would tell me that's probably where that information came from, right?
But
And then bringing you back to GM, right, was a way that, they did the dinner thing and that blew up in their face, right? So they figured, man, we got to bring this guy back. Let's give him a position somewhere. Let's move him from the Lordstown area, get him working on something else, and hopefully this way we can keep an eye on him. And hopefully he, just goes, does his work, doesn't cause any problems, and we can let it go. And then, of course, their other thought was, then if he just continues to cause problems, then we'll deal with that as it comes.
Yeah.
And they put you in an area where it was heavily influenced by organized crime. And I'm sure, the organized crime in that area probably had a good control of law enforcement and things like that in that area. So it was easy for them to move around and do the things that they needed to do.
right.
Does anything what becomes of what happens at your time at GM? How after this accident occurs, what happens after that?
Well, they proceeded to harass my wife. And
How so?
well, I ended up getting an attorney, Mr. Peterson. The GM engineer said, I'd get an attorney, Gary. He said, this doesn't sound good. So I did. I got an attorney with Richter, Sykin and Ross, one of the largest law firms in Philadelphia. And they started on the case and tried to stop the demolition of the vehicle and that. But then I get a call from a fellow by the name of Doug Armstrong out of the blue from the Milwaukee Journal. And he was one of the top
Investigative reporters,
editorial editors in the United States. And he says, I know about you. And he said, I'm aware that they're investigating the quality problem with GM cars. The Federal Trade Commission is, which is in my book. And the gentleman that subpoenaed me, that's in my book.
Real quick, let's very quickly, if we can, go back to that 8-page letter. What was the general point of the letter in regards to the quality problems that you were reporting to the head of GM?
Well, I explained to them the bad brakes were passed. And then, of course, after I was terminated, Mr. Anderson got me a job with Open Road. And that's kind of a sidebar here.
Yeah, we'll save some for the book. Again, you guys need to pick this up. It's Truth, Not Deception. Check it out. You can get it on Amazon. Gary's got a website, truthnotdeception.com. His website actually has the entire trial transcript of the James Ferrara trial, again, who was convicted of killing Benjamin Marsh. So you can read the whole transcript, that whole shady case there. Check that out as well. But kind of before we get out of here today, before we wrap this up, so you survive this accident, right? This quote accident. You looked at it as a at the time. Did you look at it as an attempt on your life, or did you think it was an accident at the time?
No, I think it was an attempt on my life.
So you survived this attempt on your life. What's the end result? Are you fired from GM? Do you resign? Do you quit? How do you leave General Motors?
Okay, let me take one step in about my wife.
Sure. And how were they harassing her? You said
they pulled up beside her on her way home and said, you keep screwing with GM, you and your husband, you're going to get a bullet through your head.
A bullet?
Yeah. So during that time, Doug Armstrong contacted the Federal Trade Commission, or the Wisconsin Trade Commission, which was ran by a Wisconsin senator. And they called me and they asked me if I would testify because I had all the documents I accumulated on all the defects. Well, I said, yes, I will. So I flew out there, they sent me a ticket. I sent boxes of documents to them. And all of a sudden, a day later, I get a phone call from my wife, Barbara, and she said, Gary, I want you to come home. And I said, why is that? She said, somebody tried kicking the door in. We had a door bar, and they didn't get in there, but they went next door, held a knife to the lady's throat, and raped her. And I said, I'll be right home. So I came home. We had an apartment. It was called Deer Path Woods. Had my back and the partition in between us, sat downstairs because I was afraid they would return. Lo and behold, they returned. Tried to kick the door in. I ran upstairs. We had a balcony. Unloaded the automatic into the woods. Here comes the cops. There's an incident there. And they said, what went on? And I said, well, the neighbor got raped yesterday. And I said, they're not going to break in and take me out or take my wife out. So that's what happened.
And when was that the end of the line for you? Did you resign? What happened?
No. General Motors was under a federal trade investigation. And how that happened is when I went from open road, I turned around and went into a business in Simsbury, Connecticut, and joined their group, became a partner. They had nursing homes and first indoor tennis house in the United States. They were quite wealthy. And they wanted me to start a RV dealership there. So I went up there. Well, during that time, I did have a security background check done on me. And they owned the Farmington Valley Taxi Company. Lo and behold, I get a call, and one of my partners said, how would you like to meet Teddy Kennedy? I said, and Caroline. And I said, that's great. And they said, would you pick him up at the Hartford airport? Well, Teddy sat in the front seat, Caroline sat in the back seat, and they went to the Porter School for Girls. That's where Caroline's mother attended. That was the tie. And during that time, he brought up a conversation. He said, you seemed like you're pretty well versed on this, what happened. And I gave him the background. So all of a sudden, he said, the Federal Trade Commission is investigating General Motors right now. And I said, yes, I do. And he says, I'm going to see what we can do. And that was only 2 or 3 conversations with him. 2 or 3 times I picked him up in Caroline at the airport. So anyway, I get a call from the zone office, an answer to your question. And they said, we want you to come to the zone office. Well, I find out, I get another phone call from the one that subpoenaed me, who was in the book, from the Federal Trade Commission. And they had destroyed all the documents that were sent to the zone office. But what they forgot to remember was that all those documents, because I had a special assigned duty, it was called a 1241 investigator. Why in the world they ever did that, I have no idea. And I said, I really don't care to be doing that. And they said, well, you don't have a choice. That's part of your job. That your job as a rep for the dealers and for the heavy duty truck rep.
What, to maintain these
Yeah.
documents or to keep?
Right.
Yeah.
So they did not realize that all those documents, because of my 1241 classification, got sent to my home because I basically worked out of my home. And I don't know why, just out of instinct, I saved all the envelopes. I put them up in the attic. I had all the dirty documents that they destroyed in the zone office when the Federal Trade Commission come in. So I get called into the office, and Mr. Arntz, the zone manager, was there, and also 2 attorneys were there. And he says, GM's being sued over all these defects because they took the zinc out of the metal. The Vegas rusted out, the pickup trucks rusted out, they had engine problems, transmission problems. And he said, we know you have a copy of those documents. And there's 2 attorneys standing there from GM. And he said, we want you to plead the 5th when you're subpoenaed. And if you don't, we're going to fire you. And I said, you can fire me now. You can fire me now. I said, I'm not going to lie. I said that, and what they did, and it was strange, in conversation with Alfred Warren, even during that time, that they weighed every one of the liability cases, be it an injury or be it a death, with what they would analyze the individual and see if they had the capability to sue or whether they would sue. And a fine example of that continued on with Mary Barra, the existing, because 270 some people lost their lives with the faulty ignition switch. So they they fired me again, and I sued them. It was in a state court in Pennsylvania. So GM thought they would pull a quickie and get it switched to the federal court in Harrisburg. And there were 3 attorneys there. And my attorney, of course, is letting me know what's going on. And he says, they literally pick your name out of the hat. Said 2 of them are Republicans. They're definitely pro-GM. One of them's a Democrat. Her name's Sylvia Rambo. Well, guess who you got picked by? Sylvia Rambo. And she says, I'm going to hear your case. So anyway, at that point in time, I went back home to start over, start looking for a job, found a job, got a call from my attorney and said, they want to depose you, and we want you to bring all the documents that you have, which was an extended Dodge van full, packed to the roof. So he says, I'll make arrangements. You put them in the room. He said, where they can't see them. If they see them, they can have them. So he says, we'll be on one side of the table. 3 of them will be on the other side of the table. So we had an interview, and he says, what documents do you have? I said, have them all during my time period. They said, would you identify which one, do you have any on the rust? I said, yeah. I went in, picked it out, brought it in to them. They looked at it, and you could see the redness in their face elevate. And they kept to the engine, to the tranny. Long story, about 5 trips, getting documents. And they said, time out. We're going to settle. So they agreed to settle with me.
Did, as far as the actual the federal trade investigation, what came of that?
Well, like most of the stuff, it got money talks. It was the largest corporation in the world. Same way with the ignition switch and Mary Barra in 2014.
They just got fined, or
So we'll pay a fine and then we'll pay out, settlement money for these cases.
Well, bear in mind, in 2009, General Motors went bankrupt.
mm-hmm. Anybody from the Mahoning Valley knows that time very well. The General Motors and was bankrupt. GM Lordstown, everybody was getting laid off and feared that they were going to lose their jobs. And President Barack Obama and the Congress stepped in and with the federal bailout of General Motors,
which I will say I was totally against.
And there was a gentleman involved in that bailout. His name was Mr. Weiss, and he is also with Mr. Biden right now. And he is the one that did the construct on the bailout. The bottom line is the American taxpayer got screwed out of about $10 million.
Yeah. At the time, I remember, the GM workers, the GM Lordstown workers were obviously happy that their jobs were saved. There were some jobs saved. And then you fast forward all these years later, and GM Lordstown is closing up shop. But before they did that, President Trump was in town. And I remember specifically he tells everyone, don't worry, GM Lordstown. He made a big point about GM Lordstown. It was going to be fine. They were going to, reopen all this stuff. Here we are today. What is it? 2024. General Motors Lordstown, after decades of manufacturing and jobs, is gone. GM Lordstown does no longer exists. And, now they're supposedly making electric cars out of there, but they've yet to really even make one.
Yeah.
And there's a battery plant that is functioning. I know that.
Right.
But yeah, what a mess. Out of all this, the GM Lordstown, it's just kind of sad that it doesn't even exist anymore. But you go all the way back to 1974, and was this the beginning of the downfall to GM Lordstown? Was it after this murder and this cover up and all these other things that happened there? Was it a calculated decision by Mary Barra and the tops of GM by, decades later, just to say, we don't even want GM Lordstown anymore. It's more of a headache than it is. There's so many skeletons in that closet.
Exactly. And Mary Barra ended up, she fired a bunch upon her arrival as CEO, which she is now one of the highest paid CEOs in the United States, $20-some million a year, plus bonus.
Yeah.
But she went to the trial. She was evasive at the trial.
Which trial?
Involving the ignition switch.
Okay.
Which killed 275 people and injured over 100. And the bottom line is, even one of the, and it's in my book, even one of the individuals lied. GM management hierarchy lied. Nothing was done. And the net result was, after the bailout and after they received all the taxpayers' money, they issued them $900 million for a fine.
Yeah.
No one got charged. No one went to prison. Not a one.
That's sadly, that's
Corporate greed.
Corporate greed, the status quo of corporate greed in America and just corporations in general. Corporations get treated better than citizens in this country, and it's sad. But as you said a few times in this interview, money talks. And Gary, We appreciate you coming in. There's a lot more in Gary's book, but we just scratched the surface here. We did a follow-up again. If you want to hear about, more of the mob connection with GM Lordstown, some of the rackets, we covered that extensively in our previous interview with Gary Bonnell. Again, with our episode into Bobby Parks, our episode where we talk with James Ferrara, and give a quick update right now. James Ferrara is actively seeking a lawsuit right now, or not a lawsuit, but a law department is looking into his case to look at this new evidence to see if it warrants a retrial, a new trial in his case. So we'll keep you updated with whenever we hear any information on that. But again, Gary's book is called Truth, Not Deception. We just scratched the surface here, but you've got one of the biggest American corporations in history. You've got, GM, General Motors. You've got murder. You've got the mafia. You've got cover-ups. You've got, attempts on Gary's life. Everything's in this book. So check it out, everybody. It's, we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but it's all here in the book. So definitely get a copy for yourself. Check out our previous episodes. If you have anything to add to this, or you have any questions for us or for Gary, shoot us an email, steelvalleysyndicate@gmail.com. We'll gladly pass along any comments or questions to Gary. And of course, check out all of our previous episodes. If you enjoy this stuff, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and give us a review. It really helps people find our show. We're continuing to do more episodes, and got a lot more coming your way. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, it's a great episode. I want to thank Gary for coming out and doing another episode with us. I know there's a lot to cover in the book. And like Johnny said, get a copy of the book. It's a great read. Very interesting story. A lot of Youngstown history in there. So just make sure you check it out.
All right, Gary, thanks for coming in. And
thank you.
We'll follow up. We'll keep you posted.
Thank
and
you.
Obviously with whatever happens with Jim Ferrara, and go from there. So till next time, everybody, I'm Johnny Ciccatelli. This is our guest, Gary Bonnell, my co-host, James Naples. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.
Thank you.
That was an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like and subscribe buttons and share it with your friends. It goes a long way in helping us produce more amazing content.